Hello, and welcome to Plotfall. Tonight, our story takes us into the world of a day in the life of a slave building the Great Wall of China. Let your mind drift, far from the polished, iconic images of the Great Wall we know today. We are traveling much further back, to a raw and wind-scoured land under the reign of Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor. The air itself feels ancient here, biting with the chill of the northern plains, carrying the ever-present scent of dust and the faint, sour aroma of massed human sweat. This isn't the formidable stone dragon of later dynasties. This is its harsh, brutal genesis, a sprawling ambition etched into the very earth. Imagine the scene unfolding before you, not in grand, sweeping vistas, but in gritty, close detail. There are no neatly paved ramparts yet, no grand watchtowers piercing a clear blue sky. Instead, you would see a vast, sprawling wound upon the land, a seemingly endless line of frenetic, often desperate activity. Mountains of rough-hewn rock, some barely shaped, others jagged and unforgiving, lie in chaotic piles. The ground itself is a testament to the struggle, a churned morass of mud in the wet seasons, a choking desert of fine, lowest dust in the dry. The wall in these nascent stages is often a colossal earthwork, a wide, formidable mound of compacted soil and crudely stacked stones, a monument more to sheer relentless human will than to refined engineering. The soundtrack to this era is a grim, percussive symphony, played out under a vast, indifferent sky. Listen closely, and you might hear the rhythmic thud-thud-thud of heavy wooden tampers compacting earth, the grating scrape and groan of immense stones being dragged over uneven ground, often on rudimentary log rollers. Above this, the endless murmur of thousands of voices, some perhaps attempting weary work songs to find a rhythm, others just the low hum of exertion. Occasionally, a sharper sound might cut through the distant crack of a supervisor's lash or the harsh bark of an order. The air would be thick, not just with dust, but with the almost palpable weight of human effort, a colossal, silent offering to an emperor's unyielding vision. This was the dawn of the Long Wall, built not just of stone and earth, but of countless, largely forgotten lives. And now, before that dawn truly breaks, before the first hint of sun warms the rugged peaks, let's linger in the preceding stillness. Imagine the cold, not just a surface chill, but a deep, penetrating dampness that seeps into your bones, finding its way through any meager covering you might possess. You might be curled against a rough-hewn rock, or nestled amongst a sprawl of other shivering forms, all existing in the shared, fragile moment before the day's brutal demands begin. Look up. The stars are still ablaze, scattered like chips of brilliant ice across an endless, ink-black sky. There's no intrusive glow from cities yet to be born, just the pure, ancient light of distant galaxies. Below this celestial display, the landscape unfurls, a vast, wild expanse of shadow and silhouette. The dark shapes of mountains loom, silent sentinels over plains that sleep under a thick blanket of pre-dawn quiet. The silence is immense, almost a tangible thing. It presses in, a stark, hollow contrast to the clamor of construction that will soon shatter it. For these fleeting moments, the only sound that truly registers is the wind. A long, drawn-out sigh as it sweeps across the untamed earth, rustling through unseen, hardy grasses, a lonely voice in the vast emptiness. This is the quiet breath before the storm of labor, a brief, cold peace under the watchful eyes of a billion stars. But even the deepest peace, under those distant stars, must eventually yield. Slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, a change begins. Deep within the sprawling, rough-hewn camp, the first unwilling movements ripple through the thinning darkness. It's not a sudden awakening, more a reluctant, collective stirring. Hear them, if you can, the quiet rustles of straw bedding, a sound like dry leaves skittering across a cold floor. Listen for the rasp of coarse fabric against skin, the muffled coughs that echo faintly between the packed earth, and the low, sagging roofs of makeshift shelters. These are the sounds of thousands of souls, pressed together in shared misery, forced from a sleep that was never truly restful, always too short, always haunted by the ache of yesterday's labor and the dread of tomorrow's. Imagine, for a moment, the air you might breathe in such a place. It's thick, heavy with the scent of unwashed bodies, of damp earth, and the lingering, acrid smell of stale sweat. The ground beneath, perhaps just a thin layer of straw over packed dirt, offers little comfort, still cold from the night's pervasive chill. Each shift of a limb, each soft groan, is a silent protest against the inevitable. There are no gentle awakenings here, no soft light filtering through a window. Only the gradual, grim realization that another day of crushing toil has begun, heralded by the distant, guttural shouts of overseers, a sound that cuts through the pre-dawn gloom like a whip. Those shouts, sharp and unforgiving, are the only alarm clock you'll ever know here. They don't just wake you, they yank you from whatever fleeting, restless oblivion you might have found. Your eyes crack open, gritty and sore, to a world still draped in the cold, gray shroud of pre-dawn. There's no stretching, no gentle easing into consciousness. Instead, it's an immediate, brutal awareness of every ache, every raw patch of skin, every knot of hunger tightening in your belly. Imagine trying to uncurl your fingers, stiff and clumsy from the cold and the previous day's labor, perhaps still gripping imaginary tools even in sleep. Your back, a landscape of dull throbs and sharp stabs, protests as you force yourself to sit up on the damp, unforgiving ground. The air you draw in is thin and bites at your lungs, carrying the familiar medley of stale human odors, cold earth, and perhaps the distant, tantalizing, yet ultimately mocking, smell of wood smoke from the overseer's fires. Fires you won't feel the warmth of. Around you, shadowy figures stir, a collective sigh of resignation rippling through the packed sleeping quarters. Each movement is slow, burdened. There's no conversation, just the rustle of straw, the occasional cough, the clinking of a rough bowl perhaps, as someone prepares for the day's meager, watery gruel. The spirit, already battered, feels a fresh wave of weariness wash over it. The sun hasn't even thought about painting the eastern sky, yet the day's defeat already feels complete, an accepted truth before the first stone is even lifted. The shelter, if you could even grant it such a generous term, offers little real defense against the raw elements. It's a crude assembly of rough-hewn timbers, or perhaps walls of packed mud and stone, thrown together with the same chilling disregard for human comfort that defines this monumental, merciless project. The wind, a constant mournful companion in these remote mountains, whispers or sometimes shrieks through the countless gaps, carrying with it fine dust and the biting cold of the pre-dawn air. There's no true door to speak of, just an opening perhaps loosely covered by a tattered animal hide, a flimsy, almost mocking suggestion of separation from the vast, indifferent wilderness just beyond. Inside, your bed is a cruel illusion. You might possess a thin, woven mat, if fortune has smiled grimly and briefly upon you, laid directly onto the cold, unforgiving earth. More likely, it's just the ground itself, hard and damp, relentlessly stealing what little warmth your exhausted body can generate. You are packed shoulder to shoulder, a dense mosaic of shared misery. The warmth of other bodies is no comfort here. It's a claustrophobic reminder of the utter lack of privacy, the complete erasure of self in this collective suffering. Every cough, every rustle of straw, every hushed whimper from your unseen neighbors is intimately yours, a shared soundtrack to the brief, troubled darkness. The air hangs heavy, almost palpable, thick with the scent of unwashed bodies, stale breath, and the faint, earthy smell of damp soil and mold quietly flourishing in the shadowed corners. This isn't rest, not truly. It's a brief, fitful cessation of forced labor, a hollow pause before the crushing weight of the day descends once more. There is no refuge here, no quiet corner to call your own, no moment of solitude, just the inescapable, pressing reality of shared hardship, a grim prelude to the rock, the dust, and the sun's glare that awaits. A tremor, perhaps a cough from a nearby body, or the distant, chilling cry of a guard's horn pulls you from that shallow pool of unconsciousness. It's not a gentle awakening, never is. Your eyelids, heavy and gritty as though filled with the very dust you'll soon be swallowing, peel open to a familiar gray gloom. The air, still thick with the odors of the night, that cloying mix of sweat, fear, and sickness, now carries a new, sharper edge, the damp chill of pre-dawn, seeping through your thin rags. A dull ache throbs in your back, a constant, unwelcome companion, and your joints protest with every tiny shift of your limbs on the rough, unforgiving ground. What's the first thought that truly takes hold in that fragile moment between sleep and forced wakefulness? Is it the gnawing emptiness in your stomach, a hollow, familiar craving that the day's meager ration of watery millet gruel will barely acknowledge, let alone satisfy? Or perhaps it's a fleeting, ghostly image, a sun-drenched field from a life that feels centuries, not just years, away, a memory so precious it's almost painful to recall. The face of a child, a wife, a parent, materializing for a heart-wrenching second before dissolving back into the grim reality of this desolate place. Maybe there are no such specific tender thoughts left, just a heavy, leaden certainty pressing down on your chest. The stones are waiting. The endless, back-breaking rhythm of lift, carry, place. Another day, indistinguishable from the last, and, with a chilling certainty, identical to the one that will follow. The sun itself will soon rise, not as a promise of warmth, but as another silent, relentless overseer. But even before that indifferent celestial eye peers over the jagged horizon, your day has already been violently torn open. There is no gentle stirring here, no soft bird song filtering through a peaceful dawn. Instead, the air is shattered. Hoarse, guttural shouts from the overseers, voices raw with impatience and authority, rip through the pre-dawn gloom. These are not words of encouragement, but commands, sharp and unforgiving as the wind that whips across these barren lands. Accompanying the shouts, a more metallic, percussive dread, the clang of crude gongs. Imagine not a melodious chime, but a jarring, resonant thud of metal on metal, a sound seemingly designed to grate on the nerves, to banish any lingering fragment of sleep or peace. Each strike echoes the grim pronouncements of the day. More stone, more suffering, more endless, grinding work. This is your true rooster's crow, a sound that doesn't herald a new day's potential, but merely confirms the continuation of an old nightmare. The air, still carrying the night's chill, now tastes of dust and apprehension. Around you, in the dim, flickering light of perhaps a few scattered torches, or the earliest gray wash of dawn, other shadows stir. Groans, muffled coughs, the rustle of thin worn garments against even thinner bodies. There's a shared, unspoken understanding in these reluctant movements, a collective sigh too weary to be voiced. The gongs continue their brutal rhythm, a heartbeat for the coming torment, a stark reminder that your existence here is measured not in moments of rest, but in the relentless demands of the wall. The insistent clang of the gongs might soften just a fraction in your perception as you shuffle, joints stiff and protesting the cold, towards the source of a faint, earthy, almost dusty smell. It's not an aroma that promises pleasure, more a dull, necessary scent that hangs heavy in the air, mingling with the ever-present odor of unwashed bodies and damp earth. This is where you'll receive what passes for the day's first sustenance, a ritual performed in resigned silence. Breakfast, a term that feels almost laughably grand for what awaits, is a thin, grayish gruel, likely millet or some other coarse, unyielding grain, ladled from a large, steaming pot into whatever rough wooden or earthenware bowl you possess. You might cradle the bowl, its surface rough against your skin, feeling the slight, quickly fading warmth seep into your chilled hands. The steam, if any, is thin and wispy in the cold morning air, carrying that same bland, slightly sour scent. The taste? Imagine it. Watery, with a gritty texture that scrapes faintly against your tongue, a bland nothingness that offers little comfort and even less true energy. Each spoonful is a mechanical act, a reminder of your depleted reserves. This meager portion, swallowed quickly under the watchful eyes of overseers, whose own meals are no doubt far more substantial, is supposed to fuel hours of back-breaking labor. Hauling stone, tamping earth, enduring the lash or the callous shout, all under a sun that will soon become relentless. It's a cruel joke, really, this meager offering against the mountain of effort demanded. Your stomach, though momentarily less empty, still feels hollow, a familiar gnawing ache that will be your constant companion throughout the long, arduous day ahead, a day just beginning to dawn. The gnawing ache in your belly, a dull, persistent throb, is a constant reminder of what awaits, a quiet prelude to the day's labors. As the pale, reluctant light of dawn strengthens, casting long, weary shadows, you and the others are herded towards the tool repository. Don't imagine a well-stocked workshop, gleaming with finely crafted instruments, each one balanced and sharp. That's a craftsman's dream, not your reality. What awaits you is a jumbled, almost haphazard collection, a testament to endless toil and the most minimal of care, piled in the dirt or leaning against a rough-hewn wall. You reach out, your fingers brushing against the tools designated for your section, your work gang. Perhaps you select a carrying pole. Run your hand along its surface. The wood is coarse, often splintered, sending little sharp protests into your already calloused palms if you're not careful. Feel its unyielding, substantial weight, a deadening preview of the immense stones and packed earth it will soon help you bear, digging into your shoulder with every step. Or maybe your hand closes around a heavy, pitted iron hammer, its head crudely shaped, more blunt instrument than precise tool. Its handle is worn smooth in some patches by countless other hands, perhaps slick with the sweat and grime of previous unfortunates, yet rough in others. The cold of the metal seeps deep into your skin, a chilling premonition that has little to do with the cool morning air. These are not tools of elegant precision, but clumsy, brutal instruments of brute force, extensions of your own expendable body. Each one is a burden in itself, a dead weight you must carry even before the real work begins, a constant, heavy reminder of your lot. With the tools distributed, a dull signal, perhaps a horn blast muffled by the lingering dawn chill, or a shouted command quickly swallowed by the vast, indifferent landscape, ripples through the camp. It's the cue. The mass of bodies begins to stir, a reluctant awakening from the cold earth or crowded pallet. Slowly, so slowly, you and thousands like you begin to funnel out from the squalid confines of the sleeping quarters. This isn't a march of soldiers, proud and purposeful. No, this is a river of humanity, a sluggish, gray-brown tide, pulled towards an unseen, unrelenting shore of toil. The journey itself is a study in miserable monotony. Your feet, perhaps bare, or wrapped in thin, worn rags that offer little protection, find purchase as best they can on the uneven, rocky ground. Each step is a small victory against the sharp stones, and a small defeat in the face of the endless path ahead. The air, still holding the night's chill, bites at any exposed skin, but soon the press of bodies, the sheer exertion of moving across the rugged terrain, will bring its own damp, suffocating warmth. You hear the rhythmic scuffing of countless feet, the occasional dry cough echoing in the quiet, the low murmur of hushed despair, but mostly a heavy, trudging silence under the watchful, indifferent eyes of overseers. You are one drop in this immense flowing current of souls, indistinguishable from the person in front or the one behind, each just another shadow in the pale morning light. The path winds ever upwards, a treacherous scar carved across the face of the wild hills. Far ahead, if you dare to lift your gaze from the treacherous ground beneath your feet, you might glimpse a raw, new section of the wall, a line of stone and earth clinging precariously to a distant ridge, looking more like a natural, monstrous outcrop than anything man-made. It waits, impassive and demanding. And you, already tired, a deep ache settling into your muscles before the real labor even starts, shuffle on towards it, knowing the day has barely dawned on your suffering. And then, you round a final desolate bend, and the wall truly reveals itself. Not just a distant line anymore, but a looming, almost breathing presence. It's a raw, gaping wound of packed earth, of rough-hewn stone dragged miles by hands like yours, a monstrous man-made spine being forced onto the back of the unyielding mountains. The air here feels different, colder, heavy with the scent of damp soil and the sharp, flinty smell of freshly broken rock. The wind, always a companion in these high places, seems to whistle a mournful tune through the countless crevices, carrying with it the fine, stinging dust of construction and the faint metallic tang of human sweat and distant, weary shouts. You stand there, a tiny speck at its colossal base, utterly dwarfed. It stretches impossibly in either direction, a ribbon of relentless toil disappearing over jagged peaks, only to re-emerge on a far-off ridge, then plunge once more into unseen valleys. Imagine trying to measure it, not in lie, but in lifetimes, the countless forgotten lives already poured into every foot of its relentless advance across this formidable, hostile landscape. Each stone, cold and indifferent beneath your fingers if you dared to touch it, seems to hum with the echoes of those who placed it there. There's no artistry to this section. Not yet. Just brutal, oppressive functionality, a barrier born of fear and immense ambition, growing meter by painful meter under a vast, uncaring sky. It's a testament not to glory, but to an almost unimaginable human endurance and suffering. And for so many, that endurance began not with laying stones, but with tearing them from the earth. Picture yourself, if you will, at the foot of a raw, gaping wound in the mountainside, the quarry. The air here is a character in itself, a gritty, pervasive fog of fine stone dust that settles like a shroud on everything. It clogs your nostrils with the dry scent of shattered rock, coats your tongue with a chalky, bitter film, and stings your eyes, making the sharp edges of the rock face swim and blur. Your hands, perhaps wrapped in meager rags against the worst of the splinters, are raw and blistered. They grip a primitive chisel, its bronze or iron edge already dulled from countless impacts, and a heavy, ill-balanced hammer that feels like an extension of your own exhaustion. The sound that defines your hours, your days, perhaps your entire shortened life here, is the monotonous, jarring storex of your tool against the unyielding stone, multiplied by hundreds around you. It's a desolate chorus, occasionally pierced by the sharp crack of a larger piece finally surrendering, or the sickening thud of a falling rock, a sound that makes everyone freeze for a fearful heartbeat. Each swing sends a jolt through your already aching arms, your shoulders screaming in protest. You chip and hammer, under a sun that feels less like warmth and more like a relentless, heavy weight pressing down upon you. Sweat, stinging and constant, mingles with the dust, creating gritty rivulets that trace paths down your skin. Itching, always itching. Progress is measured in inches, in fragments. Each hard-won piece of rock, a small, bitter victory in an endless, seemingly unwinnable battle against the sheer, indifferent mass of the mountain. And once those stones are free, once the mountain has reluctantly yielded its fragments, their journey has only just begun. Now you might find yourself part of another, equally soul-crushing rhythm. Picture it, a human chain, stretching as far as the eye can see, disappearing into the dusty haze that always seems to hang over these construction sites. The man beside you, perhaps someone whose name you never learned, or perhaps a brother, gaunt and grim-faced, heaves a heavy, rough-hewn rock into your waiting arms. Its weight slams into you, a familiar shock that travels up your arms and settles deep in your already screaming back. The stone is cold or hot from the sun, its edges sharp against your calloused, perhaps bleeding palms. You take it, pivot, and pass it on. Another arrives almost immediately. Then another. And another. It's not just stones. Baskets, heavy with damp earth, threatening to spill with every movement, also make their way down the line, passed from one aching body to the next. The air is thick with the grunts of exertion, the shuffle of weary feet on loose soil, the rhythmic, dull thud of rock meeting calloused hand. The sun beats down, or perhaps it's the biting wind of winter, numbing your fingers until you can barely feel the load. Each pass is a small eternity, each hour a blur of identical, agonizing movements. There's a strange hypnotic quality to it, this endless flow of material, built on a foundation of pure human misery. You are but one link, easily replaceable, in this immense, crawling serpent of labor. Sometimes, a flicker of crude technology breaks the monotony of purely human chains. A simple wooden cart, its wheels perhaps unevenly hewn, groans into view. Pulled not by strong oxen, for those are a luxury, but by a team of your fellow laborers, their bodies angled low, straining against ropes that bite deep into their shoulders. The wood creaks a mournful song with every agonizing turn of the axle, a sound that blends with the labored breathing of the men. Or perhaps it's a large woven basket, heavy with quarried stone or dense earth slung between two poles. The fibers of the basket, coarse and unyielding, dig into calloused hands. The weight, the dead, relentless thing that saps warmth and strength. Even with these simple tools, these creaking carts, these rough-hewn baskets, the relief is fleeting, almost an illusion. The effort is still colossal, a monstrous undertaking that demands every last reserve of energy you possess. And then some. Imagine the feel of that rough rope, or the splintered wood of a carrying pole, against your skin, day after day. The sheer, unyielding mass of stone or earth, even when shared or wheeled, presses down, a constant reminder of the immense scale of the emperor's ambition. Each pull, each lift, is a victory hard won, yet it brings you only to the next identical task, the next wave of exhaustion threatening to pull you under. And so, the hours, then days, bleed into one another, settling into a grim, unyielding rhythm. It's a terrible kind of music, this life. Lifting the heavy, rough-hewn stones, their edges biting into already raw palms. Carrying them along treacherous, narrow paths, your shoulders screaming under the weight of a shared beam. Placing them, with a dull thud, into their designated spot, only to turn back for the next. Again and again, the scrape of stone on stone, the shuffle of countless weary feet, becomes the soundtrack to your existence, a harsh, grating lullaby. Your mind, perhaps mercifully, might begin to numb, focusing only on the next movement, the next aching breath. Around you, a seemingly endless line of shadows, ghosts, coated in the ubiquitous dust, each mirroring your movements. A slow, agonizing dance of forced labor under a vast, indifferent sky. The sun might bake the cracked earth beneath your worn sandals, or a biting wind could whip through the mountain passes, chilling you to the bone. But the work, the rhythm, never changes. This monotonous cycle is punctuated, sharply and without warning, by the barked orders of a guard, his voice like gravel, a shouted command to hurry, a cruel laugh at someone's stumble, the casual flick of a lash just close enough to make you flinch. Constant ugly reminders that any faltering, any perceived slackness, invites swift and brutal attention. There's little conversation, only the grunts of shared exertion, the sigh of dust settling, the occasional muffled cry of pain quickly suppressed. For showing weakness as an invitation, you become less a person, more a pair of hands, a straining back, a cog in this vast, indifferent machine of construction. Each stone laid, meticulously or haphazardly under duress, is a testament to an emperor's monumental ambition. But for you, it's just another weight, another piece of the earth pressing down, another step towards an oblivion you can only vaguely sense through the pervasive haze of fatigue and the dull ache in your bones. The wall rises inch by painful inch, built on a foundation of countless forgotten agonies, each one a silent scream absorbed by the unforgiving landscape. The sun climbs, a relentless furnace in the vast, pale sky, and with it your thirst intensifies, a raw, scraping presence. It's a constant companion now, this rasping dryness in your throat, a hollow ache that overshadows even the pain in your protesting back. Water. The thought becomes an obsession, a shimmering mirage always just beyond the haze of dust and exhaustion. The sources are few and far between, perhaps a distant, muddy stream where animals also drink, its banks trampled and fouled, or a brackish well dug with desperate bleeding hands, its contents carefully, cruelly rationed. You might trudge for what feels like miles, or wait for what feels like an eternity under the indifferent gaze of overseers, for your meager, allotted share. When it finally comes, cupped perhaps in a rough wooden ladle or a chipped earthenware bowl, it's rarely cool, never truly clear. You might see fine particles of silt suspended within, feel the grit between your teeth, taste the earth, the faint tang of minerals, the faint unsettling memory of countless other parched mouths. But you drink. Oh, how you drink. Each swallow is a small, fleeting victory against the encroaching desert within your own body. It's a momentary reprieve, a tiny, precious oasis in the vast, barren wasteland of your days. The relief is profound, a wave washing over your cracked lips and soothing your burning throat. Yet almost immediately, the relentless sun beats down again, and the heavy knowledge that the thirst will return, as surely and as mercilessly as the dawn, settles back into your weary mind, a familiar shadow. That brief moment of watery solace, however, is quickly overshadowed. A different kind of chill, one that has nothing to do with the evening air or quenched thirst, begins to prickle at the back of your neck. You don't always need to see them to know they are near, the overseers. Often soldiers, hardened by campaigns, or perhaps men who found a grim satisfaction in this authority, they patrol with a predatory grace. Their shadows stretch long and distorted in the dying light, or loom suddenly under the midday glare, angular and menacing against the dusty earth. The air thickens with their approach. You might hear the rhythmic thud of their heavy boots on the packed earth, a sound that drills into your consciousness, a metronome, counting down to potential pain. Or perhaps it's the soft, almost sinister swish of a leather whip being idly tapped against a calloused palm, a constant, quiet promise of what awaits any sign of weakness, any perceived slackening of pace. Their eyes, you learn quickly, miss nothing. They scan the lines of workers, faces impassive, often etched with a weary cruelty, searching for an excuse, sometimes even seeming eager for one. The glint of the sun on a bronze helmet, the creak of leather armor. These are the heralds of anxiety. The fear they cultivate is a constant companion, more persistent than the hunger gnawing at your belly or the aches radiating from your overstressed muscles. It's a cold knot in your stomach that tightens whenever an order is barked, whenever a shadow falls too close. You learn to move with a desperate, strained efficiency, every muscle tensed not just from labor but from the ever-present threat. A dropped stone, a moment's hesitation, a cough that sounds too much like a complaint. Any of these could invite a closer, unwelcome scrutiny, and the sharp, searing kiss of the lash. This isn't just work. It's a tightrope walk over a chasm of brutality, each step carefully placed lest you fall. But even in this bleak landscape of endless toil and ever-present fear, the human spirit, however crushed, searches for a whisper of autonomy. It's rarely a grand rebellion, nothing that would echo through the desolate valleys or reach the distant emperor's ears. No, these are rebellions of the soul, almost invisible, played out in the choking dust and the biting wind that whips across the jagged peaks. Imagine, for a moment, when the overseer's gaze drifts away. Perhaps a heavy stone is settled not quite perfectly flat, not so much that it would weaken the colossal structure, not enough to invite the sting of the lash, but just askew, a tiny, silent testament to your own will. A secret imperfection known only to you and the indifferent mountains. Or maybe it's a feigned slowness in understanding a barked order, a carefully crafted incomprehension that steals a precious second or two of stillness. A brief pause in the relentless, aching rhythm of hauling and lifting. The cold air still stings your lungs with each strained gasp, and the rough, unforgiving texture of the granite scrapes against your already raw, bleeding hands. These are not acts of sabotage, not in any meaningful sense. They are too small, too fleeting to alter the wall's inexorable rise. But in a world where your body is not your own, where every waking hour is dictated by the crack of a whip or the guttural command, these minute gestures become a lifeline, A stone placed with a silent, bitter curse. A shared, fleeting glance of weary understanding with another soul equally burdened. A melody hummed so low it's barely a vibration in your own chest. These are the fragile shields against utter despair, tiny sparks of defiance that whisper, "I am still here," in the face of overwhelming darkness. But even those quiet whispers of self can be almost baked away as the morning surrenders to the harsh reality of noon. The sun, now a malevolent eye hanging directly overhead, begins its reign of unfiltered tyranny across the exposed land. Imagine, for a moment, you are standing there, on the barren, rocky inclines where the wall snakes its relentless path. There's no gentle shade from a welcoming tree, no scrap of awning offered by a compassionate overseer. Such kindness is a forgotten language here. Just the vast, indifferent sky and the sun's unblinking glare beating down, a silent, burning hammer. The heat becomes a physical presence, a heavy, suffocating blanket woven from shimmering air and the fine, choking dust kicked up by countless shuffling feet, and the monotonous thud of primitive tools. It presses down on your shoulders, seeps into your thin, sweat-soaked garments, and seems to draw every last drop of precious moisture from your very pores. The stones themselves, the gray and ochre building blocks of this immense monument to an emperor's will, radiate a fierce, almost aggressive warmth, too hot to lean against for even a fleeting moment's respite. Your own shadow shrinks to a mere dark puddle at your feet, offering no solace, no escape. The world is bleached to vibrant color, reduced to harsh whites and blinding browns, the distant mountains wavering like a half-forgotten dream. And in this vast earthen oven, the work, of course, does not cease. The air itself seems to crackle with the dry, oppressive energy of the day. Then, perhaps, a gruff shout cuts through the shimmering heat haze, a signal, not for rest, not truly, but a brief pause in the relentless rhythm of your labor. You might find yourself sinking heavily onto the hot, dusty earth, the coarse grit pressing into your already aching limbs. There's no shade to seek, no cool breeze to offer even a moment's kindness. The midday break, if it can even be called that, is a fleeting, guarded affair. A rough wooden bowl, perhaps chipped and stained from countless uses, is thrust towards you. Inside, a meager portion steams faintly. More of the same bland millet, its pale, mushy grains offering little comfort. Sometimes, if fortune dares to smile in this desolate place, a few pieces of shriveled, dried vegetable might be scattered on top, their colors muted, their texture tough. You eat quickly, mechanically, the taste of dust and despair mingling with the gritty gruel. The eyes of the overseers are never far. They linger, sharp and impatient, a constant silent reminder that this small mercy is measured in hurried mouthfuls, not moments of peace. Around you, other shadows stoop and swallow, a silent congregation of exhaustion. The air, still thick with heat, carries the faint, earthy smell of the food, quickly overwhelmed by the ever-present scent of sweat and sun-baked stone. It's barely enough to dull the sharpest pangs of hunger, certainly not enough to replenish the strength leached by the morning's brutal work. A few precious minutes, a handful of coarse grain, and then the unspoken understanding. The wall awaits. The respite, such as it is, evaporates as quickly as dew under this unforgiving sun. The sun climbs higher, its heat pressing down like a physical weight. Back on the wall, the rhythm of suffering resumes. The rasp of rough-hewn stone against calloused hands, the dull thud of earth tampers, the shouted orders of overseers. These are the sounds that score your waking hours. Each movement is an ache, each stone lifted a fresh wave of exhaustion. It's a landscape of endless labor, designed to grind down not just bodies but spirits too. Yet, even here, in this sprawling theater of human toil and misery, something fragile might flicker. Amidst the dust and the din, amidst the shared burden of existence, unspoken connections can sometimes form. Perhaps it's a shared glance with the man beside you as a particularly heavy rock is maneuvered into place. A momentary acknowledgement of mutual strain, a silent understanding passing between two souls tethered to the same colossal task. Maybe it's the almost imperceptible shift of a load by a stranger further down the line. easing your own burden for a split second before the moment is lost in the relentless flow of work. These aren't friendships forged in conversation, for words are dangerous and energy too precious to waste. They are alliances of shared breath, of common pain. A hand that steadies a stumbling foot, offered without looking, withdrawn just as quickly. A silent offering of a slightly shadier spot to rest for a forbidden moment, understood with only a nod, a flicker of gratitude in weary eyes. These are the quiet rebellions of the heart, tiny sparks of humanity, refusing to be entirely extinguished by the relentless, crushing weight of the wall. Fleeting, yes, but perhaps in their very transience all the more profound. These silent acts, unseen by the taskmasters, are the invisible threads weaving a tapestry of shared endurance. But these threads of endurance, however strong, were constantly frayed, constantly threatened by the daily dance with danger. The air itself, thick with dust and the grunts of exertion, also carried the ever-present possibility of a sudden sickening lurch. Imagine, for just a moment, standing on a swaying bamboo scaffold, the sun beating down with an indifferent fierceness, the vast, unforgiving landscape stretching out far below. A loose stone dislodged from above, a moment of distraction, a dizzy spell from the heat, and the world could tilt, sending a body tumbling towards the jagged rocks, a fleeting shadow against the stone. Then there's the dull, sickening thud of a misplaced granite block, far too heavy for weary arms to guide, the sharp, choked-off cry as it crushes a hand, splintering bone and mashing flesh. Or perhaps it's the slower, creeping horror of sunstroke, as the relentless heat addles the brain, until a worker simply collapses, no more regarded than a discarded tool. And for these calamities, what solace, what care? There are no gentle hands of a physician rushing to tend to wounds, no clean water to wash away the grime and the blood, only the buzzing of flies gathering with grim interest. Perhaps a comrade, risking a beating, offers a strip of hoarded, doubtfully clean cloth, or a poultice of mud and spit. A desperate, often futile gesture against the inevitable march of decay. Even a seemingly minor injury, a deep scratch from a roughly hewn stone, a badly twisted ankle from an uneven path, could swiftly become a death sentence. In the pervasive filth and the relentless exposure to the elements, infection was a silent, swift, and merciless killer. The wound would swell, pulse with an angry, insistent heat, the skin around it darkening ominously. The fever would follow, a consuming fire from within, a grim companion to the ever-present dread that gnawed at every soul. This was the daily gamble, the chilling reality that each sunrise might illuminate your last day of toil, your last agonized breath drawn in service to a monument you would likely never see completed, nor benefit from in any way. Beyond the immediate terror of a festering wound, another, more insidious torment filled every moment, every breath. The air itself, here along the vast sprawling line of the wall, was thick with an almost malevolent presence. Dust. It rose in choking clouds from the relentless chipping of stone, each strike of the hammer, each chisel biting into rock, releasing a fine, pale powder that hung suspended, almost alive, shimmering faintly in the harsh sunlight with a flickering lamplight of dawn. The earth, disturbed by countless bare feet, by the dragging of heavy baskets and sledges laden with rock, added its own dry tribute, a constant, gritty exhalation from the parched land. Even the wind, sweeping across the arid northern plains, carried its share, a ghostly particulate that never truly settled, always finding its way. Imagine this grime, if you can, as a second skin you could never wash truly clean. It clung to sweat-slicked bodies, caked in the creases of sunburnt necks, and lined the inside of every rough-spun tunic, a persistent, abrasive irritation. You might try to wipe it from your eyes only to smear it further, the grit stinging, blurring the already unforgiving landscape into a hazy, indistinct panorama of suffering. With every shallow gasp for air, it entered your lungs, a chalky, unwelcome guest that coated the delicate tissues, making each breath a minor struggle, a subtle rasp that became a constant, unconscious companion to the ache in your limbs. It found its way into the water, if you were fortunate enough to receive a ration, settling as a fine sediment at the bottom of the wooden cup or animal skin bag. It seasoned the meager portions of millet or coarse bread, a gritty, tasteless counterpoint to their blandness. This relentless, pervasive dust was more than an irritant. It was a tangible manifestation of the unyielding environment, a constant, silent reminder of the very earth they were moving, ton by painstaking ton, an earth that would, for so many, eventually claim them. That very dust, the earth you breathed and tasted, was also the raw material of your unending labor. It wasn't just an irritant. It was the substance from which miles of wall would rise almost impossibly from the barren, windswept ground. Imagine for a moment how a section of this monumental barrier actually came to be. No grand cranes, no modern machinery, just human muscle and an ancient, brutal ingenuity. The most common method, particularly in the arid lowest plains where stone was scarce, was rammed earth. Picture sturdy timber frames, like long, narrow boxes open at the top and bottom, erected along the planned course of the wall. Rough, splintered wood, perhaps. Into these confining frames, you and countless others would pour layers of carefully selected soil, sometimes mixed with gravel or other local materials to improve its binding. Each layer might only be a few inches thick. Then came the pounding, the rhythmic soul-numbing thud of heavy wooden or stone rammers, wielded by lines of men compacting each fresh deposit of earth. Thud, thud, thud. Each impact vibrated through your already aching body, a dull shockwave traveling from your calloused, blistered hands, up your arms, settling deep in your bones. The sound was a constant, a percussive heartbeat of forced creation, barely punctuated by the gruff orders of overseers, or the occasional weary groan, lost in the vastness. Layer by painstaking layer the earth was compressed, squeezed of its air and moisture, until it became almost as hard as sun-baked stone, visible striations marking the different pores. Once a section reached the desired height, often many feet tall, the wooden frames would be laboriously dismantled and moved to the next stretch. They left behind a pale, earthen scar that would slowly, incredibly, grow into a formidable wall, a testament to sheer, relentless toil. But not all sections of this immense undertaking were formed from packed earth. Elsewhere, the air would carry a different kind of sound, a sharper, more resonant clink and scrape, as stone, quarried with unimaginable effort, or crude sun-dried bricks, heavy and rough to the touch, became the chosen medium. Imagine your hands, already raw from endless labor, now tasked with lifting these uncompromising blocks. Each one a dead weight, cold even under the relentless sun, its edges biting into your palms through thin calluses. Course by patient course, these would be laid, one atop the other, a slow, unforgiving geometry taking shape against the vast, indifferent landscape. The dust from chipping and fitting would cake your sweat-streaked face, a gritty film in your mouth. And here, even amidst the ever-present threat of the whip and the gnawing emptiness in your stomach, a certain grim competence was demanded from you. It wasn't simply a matter of piling stones like a child's game. They had to fit, to interlock, to create a stable face that could withstand not just the elements, but also the imagined onslaught of future enemies. A subtle, coerced understanding of balance, of how one rough-hewn block would settle against another, was essential. This wasn't the refined art of a master mason, choosing his tools and his moment with quiet pride. No, this was a desperate, learned knack, born of endless repetition and the harsh, immediate consequences of failure. The wall demanded stability, and so through countless aching days, hands that might have once tilled soft earth or crafted delicate pottery were forced to understand the unyielding, silent language of stone, each piece a monument to their unseen, unwilling skill. But even the most carefully placed stones, heavy as they were, needed something more to truly bind them, to resist the slow, relentless pull of time and the shudder of the earth. What was this unseen glue, this humble sinew, holding together such a monumental ambition. In those earliest days, before the famed sticky rice mortar of later dynasties, the answer was often disarmingly simple, and deeply of the earth itself. Imagine the feel of it then. Not fine, carefully mixed cement, but a thick, clinging mud, scooped endlessly from riverbeds, or scraped from the sun-baked Loess plains. It would be gritty between your fingers, cool and damp at first, then drying uncomfortably on your skin under the relentless sun. It might carry the faint, earthy scent of decaying leaves mixed with the sharper tang of minerals, or even the subtle, unsettling smell of the stagnant water sometimes used to mix it. This wasn't a craftsman's choice. It was the only choice, what was abundantly, brutally available, to be processed by an unending stream of weary hands. This mud, painstakingly mixed, often just by foot or with crude wooden paddles, with whatever water could be found, perhaps a little straw or small pebbles for added body, was then slapped and pushed into the gaps. A thick, gloopy sound, a squelch and a sigh as it filled the voids, a sticky, primitive caulk against the wind and rain. Sometimes, if the region allowed and the overseers willed it, a basic lime mortar might be used, a step up certainly, in terms of binding strength. Limestone, quarried and then burned in crude smoky kilns, would be slaked with water, transforming into a reactive paste. It would have a harsher, chalkier feel than the simple mud, and a more acrid chemical smell that caught in the throat. Yet even this was a raw, unrefined substance, a testament to making do with what the land grudgingly offered. And it worked, didn't it? For a time. These humble mixtures, born of sheer necessity, held empires together, at least for a while, one muddy, aching handful at a time. Those aching handfuls, mixed and carried by countless more aching hands, were part of a larger, more deafening reality. If you could somehow quiet the insistent grumbling in your own empty stomach, or momentarily ignore the fire in your overstrained muscles, the air itself would hum with a grim story. It was a story written in sound, a relentless, sprawling opera of human endeavor, though perhaps opera lends it a grace it so rarely possessed, a brutal symphony composed on the anvil of exhaustion. The dominant, almost maddening rhythm was the sharp, metallic, have iron chisels biting into stubborn stone, a sound that would have carried for miles across the barren hills, a constant, high-pitched percussive rain against a backdrop of collective misery. Imagine hundreds, thousands of these tiny impacts, never ceasing from dawn till dusk. Then the deeper percussion, the heavy, resonant thud-thud-thud of earth rammers, great logs or stones wielded by teams of men, their bodies gleaming with sweat or caked with dust, compacting the lowest soil. Each impact was a jarring punctuation mark in an unending sentence of toil, a tremor you might feel in your very bones, a vibration traveling up from the parched earth through your worn-out straw sandals. Woven into this relentless mechanical chorus were the human sounds, raw and unfiltered, impossible to ignore. The strained guttural groans as another impossibly heavy basket of earth was hoisted onto an aching shoulder, the sharp, involuntary cries if a rock slipped or a foot faltered on loose scree. And cutting through it all, as sharp and cold as a winter wind whistling through a gap in the wall, the barked commands of overseers, impatient, clipped, and utterly indifferent to the symphony of suffering they so callously conducted. It was a soundscape that promised little rest, where even a moment's silence was suspicious, a constant grinding reminder of the immense human cost of such monumental ambition, echoing long after the sun had set. The afternoon sun, now beginning its slow descent, paints the landscape in hues of ochre and long, stretching shadows. That cacophony of morning, the sharp cries and relentless commands, hasn't vanished, but perhaps your perception of it has shifted. It's as if your ears, like the rest of your body, are simply too tired to register every cruel inflection with the same acuity. The taste of dust is a constant companion on your tongue, mingling with the salt of your own sweat. The gnawing in your belly from a meager midday ration has long since faded, replaced by a deeper, more insidious hollowness, the emptiness of utter depletion. Now the true test of endurance begins. Each muscle fiber screams a silent protest, a burning ache that has settled deep into your bones. Imagine your arms, no longer just tired, but feeling like leaden weights, barely animate extensions of your will. Lifting another rough-hewn stone, its edges sharp against your already raw palms, feels less like a physical act, and more like a desperate negotiation with gravity itself. Your vision might swim slightly with the effort, the distant mountains wavering in the haze. Thought, too, becomes a casualty, a thick fog rolling in, leaving only the primal urge to place one foot in front of the other, to hoist one more burden, because to stop, well, stopping isn't truly an option presented. It's a slow, grinding theft of vitality, where each moment is a testament to a resilience you never asked to possess. And it wasn't just the relentless labor, the back-breaking toil under the watchful eyes of overseers, that wore you down. The very land upon which you toiled seemed to wage its own silent, indifferent war against your efforts, an unyielding adversary in its own right. Picture, if you will, the jagged spines of mountains stretching endlessly before you, their peaks often lost in swirling mists or sliced by biting winds. Each heavy stone, each basket of earth, had to be wrestled upwards, not just against its own dead weight, but against treacherous, crumbling slopes where a single misplaced step could send you tumbling into the rocky void below. The air itself grew thin and sharp as you climbed, each breath a little more difficult, your lungs aching with the strain. Then, consider the deserts, vast, shimmering expanses where the sun beat down with an almost personal intensity. The air could feel like the blast from a furnace, dry and searing. And the sand. Oh, the sand. Whipped by sudden, furious winds, it found its way into everything. Your eyes, your throat, stinging your skin and contaminating your already meager, gritty rations of millet. The ground beneath your worn sandals might be scorching hot by day, only to plunge to a bone-chilling cold under a vast star-littered and utterly unforgiving night sky. Water, that most precious of dreams, was a constant gnawing absence. Even the sky itself offered little reliable comfort. One moment it might be a vast, empty blue, the sun baking the parched earth until it cracked and shimmered with heat haze. The next, a freezing wind could howl down from the north, chilling you to the marrow through your thin rags, or a sudden torrential downpour would transform the entire worksite into a treacherous quagmire of slick mud, making every movement a desperate, energy-sapping struggle. Each day was a fresh negotiation with these elemental forces, a constant, wearying reminder that your suffering was compounded by an environment that simply, profoundly, did not care. And yet, amidst this relentless indifference of nature and the ceaseless toil, something else might occasionally stir. Not the wind, nor the rain, but the faintest of human currents. A whisper passed down the long, snaking line of laborers like a fragile secret. Imagine it. A murmur breathed from one parched throat to another, barely audible above the rhythmic thud of tampers or the grating scrape of stone on stone. These were not conversations, not really. Just fragments snatched from the air, precious and unreliable. Perhaps word had trickled in from a distant section, carried on the weary shoulders of a transferred cohort, tales of a landslide burying comrades, or a new, even harsher overseer arriving with fresh cruelties. Or maybe a rumor, distorted and amplified with each retelling, about the Son of Heaven himself, his latest decree echoing from the gilded palaces, demanding yet more sacrifice for his monumental ambition. Sometimes it was news of battles fought on frontiers you'd never see, a stark reminder of why this great stone serpent was even being willed into existence, life by weary life. These whispers were like catching sight of a single, distant bird in an otherwise empty sky. A fleeting, almost painful reminder of a wider world. A world beyond the dust, the hunger, and the endless, aching repetition of your days. A world that, for the most part, had forgotten you entirely, or perhaps never knew you existed at all. What tiny, bitter comfort could such fleeting connections truly offer, when the reality of the wall was so crushingly immense, and the silence that followed so profound? Those fleeting connections, those whispers of a world beyond, could offer little solace against the chilling silence that settled when a body finally gave out. For the wall was a relentless consumer, not just of stone and earth, but of human endurance. What happened, you might wonder, when the relentless toil, the meager rations, or a moment's misstep finally broke a worker? When a racking cough became too violent, or a fever burned too fiercely, or a limb, twisted and broken, refused to bear weight any longer? There were no infirmaries nestled in the shadow of the growing fortifications, no gentle hands to tend to your wounds, no soft words of comfort. If you faltered, if your strength waned to the point of uselessness in the eyes of the foreman, you were often simply left. Imagine the scene, if you can bear it. The work party moves on, a slow, shuffling chain of humanity, their faces perhaps etched with a flicker of pity, quickly extinguished by their own fear and exhaustion. The sounds of their labor, the rhythmic clang of tools against stone, the grunts of exertion, the overseer's sharp, indifferent commands, would gradually fade into the vast, uncaring landscape. Soon, only the sighing of the wind through the desolate grasses, or perhaps the distant, mournful cry of a bird, would accompany the one left behind. A tiny, solitary figure, shrinking against the immensity of the half-built ramparts, the stones cool and unyielding. It was a brutal, unspoken message to those who remained, a lesson etched not in words but in absence. Keep working, keep enduring, or become another silent, forgotten offering to the earth. Each soul abandoned was a grim testament, a footnote in the shadow of the rising dragon of stone, absorbed by the silence of the mountains. And in the unending rhythm of that labor, the chipping of stone, the hauling of earth, the mind, seeking any refuge, would often slip away, back to a time before the wall, before the whips, and the gnawing hunger. Perhaps you'd see a small courtyard, bathed in the softer light of a setting sun, the scent of simple millet porridge cooking, a child's laughter echoing faintly. You might feel the ghost of a calloused, loving hand on your shoulder, a comfort so profound it's almost unbearable now. These weren't grand visions of heroism or wealth, but fleeting images of ordinary life, now rendered extraordinary by their absence. The cool, damp smell of the earth as you turned it in your own small field, the feeling of healthy exhaustion after a day spent nurturing life, not building a monument to power that consumed it. Each memory, a tiny glowing ember kept carefully in the cold expanse of the present, a reminder of warmth that once was, a fragile shield against the biting wind of despair. But such recollections were a double-edged hoe, tilling both solace and sorrow. For with the sweetness came the acute, stabbing pain of loss, the crushing weight of what had been taken. The face of a wife, a child, a parent, so clear for a moment, then dissolving back into the dust, and the endless gray stones of the dragon's spine. And the question, unspoken, unbidden, would surface. Would they ever know such peace again? Or was this toil, this suffering, all that remained? Those fleeting images of home, of peace, would inevitably fade, and the cold, hard present would solidify around you once more. A present dominated by the unblinking gaze of your overseers. The eyes. Always the eyes. They were a constant, unwelcomed presence, like 1,000 tiny needles pricking at your awareness. You'd see them glinting from the crude watchtowers dotting the desolate landscape, dark figures silhouetted against the gray sky. Or they'd be closer, uncomfortably so, the flat, indifferent stare of a guard leaning on his spear, his gaze sweeping over you and your fellow laborers, missing nothing. The scrape of his armor, the soft thud of his boots on the packed earth, were sounds that tightened the chest, a subtle drumbeat to the misery. This relentless scrutiny wasn't solely about preventing escape, though that was certainly part of their grim calculus. The vast, unforgiving terrain itself was a formidable jailer after all. No, this web of observation was spun to crush something far more delicate: hope. It was there to ensure that every sinew, every aching muscle was dedicated to the ceaseless task at hand. A moment's pause to wipe stinging sweat from your brow might be tolerated, but a lingering look towards the distant, hazy mountains, a shared glance with another captive that held a spark of something other than utter despair. These were silent invitations for trouble. The guards were human metronomes, setting a relentless rhythm of toil, their very presence a constant, chilling reminder that you were considered less than human, a mere component in the vast, brutal machinery of the wall's construction. Their watchfulness was a suffocating blanket, designed to smother any ember of defiance before it could ever truly draw breath. That suffocating blanket of watchfulness, though, wasn't just from a handful of guards. Lift your gaze if you dared, just for a moment, beyond the immediate dust and sweat, beyond the man straining beside you. What you might perceive, stretching in either direction along the raw, embryonic line of the wall, was almost incomprehensible. Not a team, not even a battalion. Imagine an anthill, a colossal, sprawling anthill of human beings, each one a tiny, moving speck in a landscape of immense, unending labor. Tens of thousands, at any given moment on these vast projects. And over the long, grinding decades, the centuries of its piecemeal construction under various dynasties, the numbers swell to hundreds of thousands. Perhaps even more, lost to the imperfect records of time, a constant, churning river of humanity, flowing reluctantly towards this singular, monumental task. You'd hear the murmur, a persistent, low thrumming composed of countless grunts, the rhythmic scrape and clang of rudimentary tools, the endless shuffling of weary feet on packed earth, the distant, hollow coughs that echoed a shared fragility. Each person a story, a life snatched from a distant village, a sun-baked field, a family now just a fading memory, all reduced to a pair of hands hauling another stone, another basket of earth. It's a staggering thought, isn't it? That so many individual heartbeats, so many small existences, could be poured into something so unyielding, so vast, it would snake across mountains and deserts for thousands of miles. The sheer, crushing weight of that collective effort, built upon countless forgotten shoulders, is almost too much to hold in the mind. And those forgotten shoulders, they weren't all cut from the same cloth, though they bore the same crushing burdens. If you could gaze upon that endless, winding line of toilers, you might begin to discern a harsh mosaic of humanity, a spectrum of unwilling participants bound to the monumental task. There were, of course, those truly enslaved, perhaps captured in some forgotten skirmish on a far-flung border, their old lives violently severed, their futures now just an endless expanse of rock and dust. Beside them you might see a convict, the mark of his transgression perhaps still a dull ache or a faded brand upon his skin. A permanent, visible reminder of a past life's misstep, now being paid for with every swing of the pick, every drop of sweat under a vast, indifferent sky. His sentence wasn't served in a dank cell, but out here, on the wind-scoured mountainsides, his energy slowly siphoned into the wall's growing shadow. Then there were the peasants, countless souls conscripted into service. These weren't necessarily outlaws or prisoners of war. Many were simply farmers, laborers, men who once knew the intimate rhythm of their own fields, the scent of wood smoke from their own hearths. Their crime, if you could call it that, was merely existing in an era that demanded their sinew and bone for an emperor's grand ambition. Imagine the quiet confusion still lingering in some eyes, the heavy resignation settling into the lines around others, as they toiled far from everything they knew, their previous lives fading like a half-forgotten dream. Each one, a different story, a different sorrow, yet all sharing the same relentless hardship. And then, just when it seemed the measure of suffering was full, winter would descend. It wasn't a gentle transition, no poetic frosting of the landscape. This was an invasion, a new, merciless overseer joining the ranks of the human ones. Picture the wind, a raw, rasping entity, howling across the barren, exposed ridges where the wall snaked ever onward. It carried no scent of pine or damp earth, only the sterile, needle-sharp bite of deepest cold, finding every tear and loose thread in your thin, patched rags, seeping into your very bones. The air itself seemed to crystallize, each indrawn breath a small, sharp ache in your chest. The earth beneath your worn straw sandals, or perhaps by now, just rags wrapped around your feet, would harden to the consistency of iron. Every footfall on the frozen ground sent a jarring shock up your already weary legs. Imagine trying to chip away at that unforgiving soil with crude, blunted tools. your fingers long past feeling, cracked and bleeding, the cold gnawing at them relentlessly. The immense stones, always a burden, now seemed to possess an extra, malevolent weight, their surfaces treacherous with frost, each lift a gamble against a slip, a crushing injury. There was no reprieve. The quotas remained, the whips still cracked with the same sharp authority, now perhaps even more eagerly in the biting air. The only warmth might be the fleeting heat of your own desperate exertion, quickly stolen by that relentless wind, or the huddled, shivering mass of bodies in a drafty, smoke-filled hut at night. This brief, troubled escape offered little true rest before the pre-dawn horn would tear through the icy stillness, signaling another day of frozen torment. This wasn't just hardship anymore. It was a slow, grinding erasure of hope. Each frozen dawn a fresh layer of despair laid upon the soul. The ice would eventually thaw, the biting winds would soften, but this brought little comfort, only a different kind of ordeal. Summer, too, carried its own unique burdens beyond the relentless, shimmering heat that baked the plains. Often the vast, open sky, once a pale, frozen canvas, would darken ominously. Then the rains would begin, not as a gentle blessing, but as a torrential onslaught, drumming against the half-finished ramparts and turning the very air heavy with moisture. The baked earth, cracked and dusty from the sun, would quickly transform under this deluge. Work sites became vast, treacherous mud baths, the air thick with the raw scent of disturbed earth and damp, rotting vegetation, mingling with the ever-present odor of unwashed, toiling bodies. Imagine trying to haul massive stones or baskets of compacted earth when the ground beneath your feet is a slick, greedy mire, eager to pull you down. Each step would be a struggle, the cold, heavy mud clinging to your legs like a shroud, weighing you down, stealing your already meager strength, its squelch and suck a constant, miserable soundtrack to your labor. This sticky, unstable footing wasn't just an inconvenience, it was a killer. The risk of slips and falls, already high, skyrocketed. A momentary loss of balance on a muddy slope, a misplaced step while carrying a heavy load, could mean a disastrous tumble, broken bones, or worse. And it wasn't just you who might fall. The partially constructed sections of the wall, their foundations loosened by the relentless water, could groan and shift. Sometimes, with terrifying speed, a segment would collapse in a chaotic roar of mud, rock, and shattered timber, burying anyone unfortunate enough to be nearby. So the warmer months offered no true respite, merely a different flavor of suffering. The gnawing cold was replaced by a suffocating damp embrace, the frozen ground by a watery, treacherous trap. The whips still sang their song, indifferent to the rain, as the monument slowly, painfully rose from the mire. And as the relentless sun finally begins its slow, weary descent, painting the bruised sky in hues of deep orange and melancholic purple, a subtle shift ripples through the endless construction site. The air, still thick with the day's dust, a gritty film that coats your tongue and stings your eyes, carries a slightly different cadence. The sharp, percussive clang of hammers against stubborn rock, the rhythmic rasp of crude saws through timber, the strained grunts of men hauling impossible loads. These sounds don't vanish, not entirely, but their frenetic, desperate pace seems to soften, just a touch, like a song slowly fading. You might feel it in your own exhausted limbs, a minuscule easing of the tension that has gripped you since before dawn. The overseers, their faces grim masks of authority all day, might now betray a hint of their own human weariness. Their shouts, perhaps, are a fraction less sharp, their ever-watchful eyes a little heavier, as true darkness creeps in from the distant mountains. They, too, have endured the day's unforgiving length, even if their burden was of a different, crueler kind. The shadows stretch long and skeletal across the churned earth, and the rising spine of the wall, swallowing the last vestiges of daylight. This isn't an act of mercy, understand. It's more akin to the natural winding down of a monstrous, soul-crushing machine that has devoured countless hours and immeasurable spirit. The approaching night offers no real solace, only a temporary reprieve before the meager, often spoiled, rations and the cold, hard ground that serves as a bed. Yet in these fleeting moments, as the first stars tentatively prick the darkening canvas above, The immense weight of the unfinished wall and the endless days to come might feel just a fraction less suffocating. Then, it finally arrives. A long, low drone from a bronze horn, perhaps, or the resonant clang of a heavy iron gong, echoes mournfully across the sprawling worksite, bouncing off the half-finished ramparts. The sound, dulled by distance for some, sharp, and almost painful for others nearer its source, carries the day's only truly welcome, if bittersweet, message: stop. For a precious, suspended moment, the relentless cacophony of construction, the rhythmic chipping of stone against stone, the strained groaning of immense logs being hauled, the barked commands of overseers, stutters, falters, and then reluctantly dies. A profound, almost sacred silence descends, punctuated only by the ragged collective exhalation of thousands of lungs. Heavy, crudely fashioned tools, their wooden handles worn smooth and dark by countless calloused, sweating hands, are let fall. Some clatter onto loose rock. Others thud softly into the thick, disturbed dust. Imagine the sensation, if you can allow yourself to step into that moment. The sudden, shocking release in muscles that have screamed in protest for what feels like an eternity. Every joint, every fiber, every sinew, now hums with a dull, deep, persistent ache. This isn't mere tiredness, the kind you feel after a day of honest work. No, this is a soul-deep weariness, a leaden weight that has seeped into the very marrow of your bones, a constant, unwelcome companion. It washes over you, a physical wave so potent it threatens to buckle your knees, to send you tumbling right there onto the cold, unforgiving earth. There is a flicker of something akin to relief, of course. The immediate, grinding agony of physical toil is mercifully paused. But it's a grim, hollow species of relief, isn't it? A fleeting reprieve that tastes like ash in the mouth. Because as the ever-present dust begins to settle in the fading light, and the evening air starts to bite with a sudden, unwelcome chill, the heavy knowledge of tomorrow looms, vast and unyielding. Another sunrise, another impossible quota, another day of spirit-crushing labor under the indifferent sky, and the watchful eyes of those who hold the whips. The temporary halt in suffering only serves to sharpen the cold dread for its inevitable, brutal return. The wall, a shadowy serpent against the dying light, simply waits. And as the wall waits, your own body, a forgotten landscape of pain, finally receives a command it understands: release. One by one, the heavy tools meet the dusty earth. That worn wooden shaft of the rammer, slick with your sweat and grime, slips from your grasp with a dull thud. Or perhaps it's the rough-hewn stone hammer, its weight an old, cruel acquaintance, now resting beside your cracked feet. Your hands. Oh, your hands. They tremble, don't they? Raw, with skin broken and blistered, new calluses forming over old wounds, they sting in the cooling air. For a moment, they feel impossibly light, a peculiar emptiness where the brutal weight of stone or compacted earth lived just seconds before. This absence is a sensation all its own, a ghostly echo of the day's relentless burden. The ache, however, remains a deep, throbbing reminder that settles into your wrists, your forearms, your very bones, a dull fire that refuses to be quenched. Around you, the air, still thick with the day's fine, gritty dust, carries the sound of 100 other tools falling silent. A collective, ragged exhalation seems to pass through the ranks, a sound less of relief and more of sheer, bone-weary depletion. The sharp commands of overseers might soften, just a fraction, their own day's vile work momentarily paused. This small act, this laying down of burdens, isn't joy. It's a brief punctuation mark in a sentence of unending toil, a tiny island of stillness in a vast, churning ocean of hardship. The air grows cooler now, the sun finally surrendering the sky, painting it in hues of bruised purple and dying orange, the vast, jagged silhouette of your day's labor stark against it. That brief pause, that momentary stillness, dissolves like mist. Slowly, achingly, the column of workers begins to move, a ragged, shuffling line of shadows stretching long and distorted in the deepening twilight. Imagine your own feet, heavy beyond belief, each one a leaden weight you must somehow lift and place upon the earth. The rough-hewn path, little more than a scar on the land, is uneven underfoot, littered with small, sharp stones that jab even through worn-out sandals. A cruel joke for ankles already strained and backs already bowed low. You don't look up much. There's little to see but the hunched form of the person in front of you, another soul lost in this seemingly endless river of misery, shuffling towards a respite that promises little true comfort. The only sounds are the rhythmic scuff and drag of worn sandals on packed dirt and loose stone, the occasional dry cough that rattles in a hollow chest, a stifled groan escaping weary lips. Perhaps, as you draw nearer to the sprawling, squalid camp, the faint, acrid smell of burning dung, stale sweat, and unwashed humanity reaches your nostrils, the grim, familiar perfume of your temporary home. Your body screams for oblivion, for the soft, unthinking embrace of deep sleep, but you know, with a certainty that settles like cold dread in your stomach, that what awaits is merely a few fitful hours on a lice-ridden mat, in a crowded, noisy hut, before the horn blares its hateful summons, and the cycle begins anew under the uncaring gaze of the mountains. The dimming light of dusk does little to soften the harsh reality of the encampment. Instead, it seems to deepen the shadows, making the rough-hewn shelters and the tired faces around you appear even more spectral. Your stomach, a hollow ache after the day's relentless toil, groans not in anticipation, but in weary resignation. Soon enough, a rough wooden bowl is pressed into your calloused hands. Inside, the evening's offering, a watery gruel, perhaps some boiled millet or a few coarse grains, barely distinguishable in the failing light. It's lukewarm, a pale, unappetizing slop that slides down your throat with a gritty resistance. There's no savor to it, no comfort, just the bland, earthy taste of mere survival. Around you the air is thick, with the sighs of 1,000 exhausted souls. The occasional rasping cough, the clatter of bowls against the packed earth. Conversation is a luxury few can afford, energy better saved. You consume it quickly, hunched over, the silence broken only by these muted sounds of grim sustenance. This isn't nourishment for the body, not really. It's just enough fuel to prevent collapse, a meager deposit for the bank of suffering from which tomorrow will make another brutal withdrawal. The taste, if you could call it that, is more of grit and despair than anything resembling food. It settles heavily, a cold stone in the pit of your stomach, a perfect prelude to the cold ground that awaits. The sun finally surrenders its last hold on the horizon, and a profound darkness swallows the landscape. It's a thick, heavy blanket this night, far from the gentle embrace you might imagine. The air grows colder still, seeping into your thin rags, into your very bones, a chill that promises no relief. Around the sprawling, miserable camp, a few fires flicker like defiant, dying embers. They offer little warmth, and even less light beyond their immediate smoky halos, casting long, dancing shadows that twist familiar shapes into monstrous, fleeting forms. This darkness isn't empty. It breathes. You huddle with others, a loose collection of shared misery, yet the vast blackness presses in, isolating each soul within its own weary thoughts. The harsh sounds of the day, the relentless clang of tools, the sharp shouts of overseers, are replaced by a different, quieter symphony. The whisper of the wind as it snakes through the crude shelters, the distant, unsettling cry of a night creature, the hacking cough of a fellow sufferer nearby. Perhaps the scuttling of unseen things in the dirt, or the faint, sour scent of sickness and unwashed humanity clinging to the damp air. Each snap of a twig, each rustle in the undergrowth just beyond the firelight, sends a fresh prickle of unease. Out there, in the ink-black, visibility is a forgotten luxury, and anything could be watching, waiting. This is a different kind of fear than the daylight brutality of the wall. It's the fear of the unknown, the unseen, a creeping dread that settles deeper than the gnawing cold. Sleep, when it finally drags you under, is shallow and fraught, less a genuine respite and more a brief, uneasy truce with the encroaching night. You lie on the unforgiving earth, listening, always listening, until the first gray, cruel hint of dawn promises only a return to a different, more visible torment. And as that gray, cruel light finally spills over the jagged horizon, painting the barren landscape in shades of ash and bone, the brief, troubled peace of the night shatters. Before the whips crack and the demands echo, there is a reluctant stirring, a slow crawl towards what little shelter exists. You might find yourself shuffling into a shallow pit scraped from the frozen earth, or a lean-to built from scavenged branches and packed mud, its roof a haphazard weave of reeds that sighs with every gust of wind. These are not homes. They are temporary burrows, shared by many. Inside, the air is heavy, a palpable blanket woven from the smells of unwashed bodies, damp soil, and the sharp, stinging smoke of a struggling fire. If a fire even exists, it's a sullen, sputtering thing, a tiny orange eye in the gloom, devouring precious, hoarded fuel for a pathetic return of warmth. You press close to others, shoulder to shoulder, back to back, seeking to steal a fragment of heat from the unwilling body next to you. There's no comfort in the touch, only the grim reality of shared space, the rough scrape of filthy tunics, the unwelcome intimacy of strangers bound by a common dread. Words are scarce here, in this dim, smoky haven. What could be said? Instead, there's a symphony of quiet desperation. The rasp of a cough, the low moan of someone shifting an aching limb, the chattering of teeth that even the huddle cannot fully silence. It's a fragile, forced community, this temporary congregation of the damned, huddled together not in fellowship, but in a desperate, fleeting attempt to fend off the vast, numbing cold of the world and the day to come. These are the stolen moments before the true ordeal begins anew. As the first sliver of gray light seeps into your shared, cramped world, the brief illusion of warmth from the huddled bodies dissolves like mist. Another day dawns, not with the gentle promise of refreshment, but with the stark, unavoidable reminder of forgotten comforts. Personal hygiene, that simple, almost unconscious act of cleansing, is a ghost here, a whispered memory from a life left far behind. Water, when it appears, is a muddy, fiercely guarded commodity, hoarded for throats parched by dust and exertion, or to mix the binding mortar for the ever-lengthening shadow of the wall. It is never, ever, for the indulgence of washing a weary, grimy body. Imagine, if you can, the constant, clinging film of fine lowest dust and dried sweat that becomes a second skin, gritty and unwelcome. Your coarse hempen garments, if you are even fortunate enough to possess more than tattered rags, are stiff with the accumulated grime of uncounted days, perhaps weeks. The air itself is heavy, a cloying miasma woven from the scent of unwashed humanity, of sickness silently brewing in the close quarters, and the faint, metallic tang of old blood from countless small, untended injuries. There is no private corner, no quiet moment, no spare cup of water to even attempt a cursory rinse. To be clean is to be an anomaly, an impossible dream. And so, the skin inevitably itches. Angry rashes bloom in the damp folds beneath coarse cloth, and the quiet, insidious threat of disease, carried on that very grime, becomes a far more constant companion than any fleeting hope of relief. It's a slow, relentless erosion, this pervasive filth, not just of the body, but of something deeper. A quiet dignity slowly, inexorably being stripped away, one gritty, uncomfortable day at a time. And so, from that thick soup of human misery and ever-present grime, the seeds of sickness find fertile ground, sprouting with a terrifying speed. In the close-packed squalor of the sleeping quarters, where bodies lie almost one atop another on rough, unforgiving earth or splintered wooden platforms, a single cough in the night is never just a cough. It's a harbinger, a tiny, rasping whisper of what's to come. Soon, that solitary sound multiplies. becoming a ragged, hacking chorus that echoes through the damp, chill air. Each expulsion, a potential carrier of further misery. Fevers begin to burn, unseen fires raging beneath skin stretched taut over bone. You might imagine lying there, your forehead blazing, your limbs aching, shivering uncontrollably one moment despite the humid press of bodies, then slick with clammy, unnerving sweat the next. Then comes the dysentery, that cruel, gut-twisting affliction, sapping what little strength remains, reducing once strong men to hollow, trembling shells. The air itself grows heavy with the scent of sickness, a faint, sweet, and unsettling aroma mingling with the existing stench of unwashed humanity. And medical help? That's a concept as foreign here as a soft bed or a kind word. There are no gentle hands to wipe a fevered brow, no soothing draughts to calm a ravaged gut. The overseers offer no solace, no remedies beyond perhaps a harsh word to get back to work, or a contemptuous glance. The sick are merely obstacles. Their suffering an inconvenience, a drain on the relentless pace of construction. Each fallen worker is just another body to be dragged away, a grim reminder of your own fragile hold on existence. The sun bleeds out from behind the jagged peaks, painting the sky in hues of bruised purple and fading orange before surrendering completely to the inky blackness. The chilling air of the northern night begins to bite, seeping through the thin walls of your crowded hut, or perhaps just across the exposed ground where you huddle with others for warmth. But the cold is almost a secondary torment to the relentless soundscape that defines these hours. Sleep, true restorative sleep, is a precious, fleeting commodity here. The night in this sprawling camp of forced labor is far from silent. Listen closely. Beyond the sigh of the wind across the barren earth, it's a chorus, really. A symphony of suffering, played out in an orchestra of human sounds. There's the persistent, racking cough, a legacy of stone dust inhaled deep into the lungs day after weary day. Then the low, guttural groans of men whose bodies are broken, whose muscles scream in protest even in supposed rest. Add to this the troubled, incoherent murmurs of those caught in the grip of fever dreams or reliving the day's brutalities, their minds finding no peace. And sometimes, carried on the night breeze from a more distant part of the camp, or perhaps from a makeshift infirmary that offers little more than a place to die, you might hear the sharper cries, the keening wail of the very ill, those whose flame is flickering, about to be extinguished. It's a sound that burrows deep, a constant, chilling reminder of how thin the veil is between this wretched existence and whatever, if anything, comes next. There is no true silence here, only the briefest pauses between one man's pain and another's. The darkness, when it finally blankets the vast, sprawling worksite, doesn't bring the solace of rest, not truly. It's a different kind of vigilance that takes over, a silent, internal hum of anxiety. Lying on your rough pallet, perhaps a thin scrape of straw over the unyielding, cold earth, the chill seeps into your bones, a damp, persistent companion through the long hours. Each rustle of movement from a nearby body, each muffled groan or hacking cough from a fellow unfortunate, is a sound that pricks at your already frayed nerves. Did a guard, his face a grim, shadowed mask in the flickering torchlight of his rounds, overhear a whispered complaint from the day? Was your day's labor deemed insufficient? The tally of stones moved too low, inviting a brutal morning reprisal. The fear of a sudden, merciless beating for an infraction you might not even be aware of, coils tight in your stomach, a cold knot of dread. Then there's the insidious creep of sickness, that persistent scratch in your throat, the dull ache that settles deep in your joints. Is it just the bone-weary exhaustion, or something more sinister taking root in the damp squalor? In these packed, unsanitary conditions, disease spreads like an unseen blight, and the weak are culled with a pitiless efficiency. To fall truly ill here is often a death sentence, slow or swift, watched with a grim resignation by those still standing. And underlying all these specific terrors, the most primal, gnawing uncertainty. Will you see the faint gray promise of dawn, or will this night, this cold, hard patch of earth, be your last contribution to this monumental, unyielding project? But perhaps, against all odds, sleep does eventually claim you. A shallow, restless slumber, punctuated by the rustle of straw, the distant coughs and low murmurs of those pressed close around you in the shared misery. And in that fleeting darkness behind your eyelids, what images flicker and dance? Do you dream, for a precious, fragile moment, of open fields stretching towards a hazy horizon, the comforting scent of wood smoke from a village hearth you barely remember? Perhaps a face materializes from the shadows, soft and kind, a whispered name on your lips. A wife, a child, a parent, their features already blurring at the edges of memory, like old paint exposed to harsh weather. These are the dreams that ache with a bittersweet poignancy, a sharp pang of what was, and what will likely never be again. Then, inevitably, the other dreams. The ones that offer no such gentle escape, only a twisted, terrifying reflection of your waking hell. The stones, always the stones, impossibly heavy, their cold, rough texture scraping your raw hands even in sleep, each one a burden on your soul. The chilling echo of the overseer's shout, the sharp crack of the whip, sounds so deeply ingrained they resonate in the quietest chambers of your mind. You might see the faces of those who fell beside you that very day, their eyes wide and vacant, a chilling premonition imprinted onto your subconscious. Or perhaps it's the endless, gray, unforgiving expanse of the wall itself, snaking over desolate mountains, a monstrous, insatiable beast you are condemned to feed with your very life, your very breath. Sleep, then, becomes not a refuge, but another landscape of torment, where the anxieties of the day merely shift their shape, becoming phantoms that stalk the shadowy corridors of your mind. A brief respite, or a continuation of the suffering. It's hard to tell, as you drift in that fragile space between forgetting and reliving. Yet, even in this landscape of waking dread and troubled sleep, the human spirit, a stubborn, flickering ember, sometimes refuses to be entirely extinguished. It's not in grand gestures, for those are beaten out of you, or worse, invite fatal attention. No, it's in the smallest, almost imperceptible things. Fragile connections woven in the shared darkness of your cramped, earth-floored shelter. The air thick with the scent of unwashed bodies and damp soil. Perhaps it's a voice, barely a breath, from the man huddled beside you on the thin matting of straw, its rough texture, a constant reminder of your meager comfort. He whispers a fragment of a story, a memory of a sun-drenched village, of a child's laughter, so vivid you can almost feel the phantom warmth on your skin, almost smell the scent of blossoms now impossibly distant. Or maybe it's the covert offering of a hoarded morsel, a slightly bruised wild fruit found during a rare moment unobserved, its unexpected sweetness, a shock, or a sliver of dried, perhaps slightly rancid, fish, its pungent, salty taste an explosion in your usually empty mouth, a taste of life itself. Sometimes, it's nothing more than a shared glance in the flickering, oily lamplight that casts long, dancing shadows on the cold stone walls, a silent acknowledgement of another's trembling, a brief pressure of a calloused hand on an arm when a coughing fit racks a nearby body. These are not acts of rebellion against the colossal wall, that stone serpent devouring the horizon, but tiny acts of self-preservation, of asserting that you are still, somehow, human. In this vast, crushing machine of stone and suffering, these fleeting moments are the air you breathe before sinking once more beneath the waves of exhaustion and despair. Perhaps, in the deepest pit of the night, when even the guards slump heavy-lidded and the groans of the injured soften into weary sighs, you find a moment. A stolen breath. Your gaze might lift, almost involuntarily, past the jagged silhouettes of the half-built fortifications, past the flickering, pathetic glow of the campfires that do little to ward off the gnawing chill that seeps into your very bones. Upwards, above the reek of unwashed bodies, stale sweat, and the ever-present dust of crushed stone that coats your tongue, the sky unfolds. An immense velvet canvas, utterly black and strewn with a billion icy points of light. The stars. They don't offer comfort, not really. There's no warmth in their distant, glittering display, no pity in their ancient, unwavering gaze as they arc across the heavens. They are simply there. A vast, silent audience to the raw misery etched into the earth below. Imagine them, these same stars, looking down upon the very first rough-hewn stone laid for this monstrous serpent of a wall, and knowing they will look down upon the last, long after every name, every whispered prayer, every silent scream of pain, has been swallowed by the unforgiving soil. They are the ageless witnesses, the cosmic backdrop to this relentless theater of human endeavor and human suffering. What, if anything, does your fleeting, aching existence mean beneath such an indifferent, eternal canopy? It's a question that hangs heavy in the cold night air, as vast and unanswerable as the star-dusted heavens themselves. Those vast, cosmic questions drift away, unanswered, like smoke from a forgotten, meager fire, as exhaustion finally begins to claim its due, pulling you under. But this is no peaceful slumber, no gentle slipping into dreams. The cold, hard earth, perhaps thinly veiled by a scattering of rough straw if fortune has smiled in its own cruel way, offers little comfort to bones that ache with a deep, resonant thrum. Each breath is shallow, tasting of dust, the stale air of too many weary bodies pressed too close for warmth, or perhaps for some faint, unspoken solidarity. You might hear the faint rustle of unseen creatures in the dark, tiny scavengers drawn to the scent of human misery, or the soft, mournful sigh of the wind as it snakes through the crevices of the half-built wall, a lonely sound in a lonely place. And beneath it all, a persistent gnawing dread that coils in the pit of your stomach. A constant companion, sleep, when it finally arrives, is a fractured, shallow thing, haunted by the echoing clang of tools, the sharp sting of the lash, the ever-present shadow of the overseer's gaze. And so an uneasy rest settles, a brief, troubled pause in an endless grinding cycle. The stars, those same indifferent celestial witnesses, begin their slow, inexorable retreat across the inky blackness, heralding a dawn that promises no relief, no respite, only the chilling certainty that the same brutal rhythm of hardship will resume with the first pale light. We leave our worker here, a single, shivering soul amongst countless others, huddled against the indifferent stone, their unwilling, calloused hands having shaped another small piece of one of history's most formidable and most unforgiving structures. Thank you for joining us on Plotfall. Until our next story, may your thoughts be calm and your rest deep.